I want to come back just to the history first. And there's very many questions about the different language groups. For example, Afrikaans banks. So at that time we had the Santams, etc., who, people till today said that they supported mostly only Afrikaner ventures, etc., and that's how the Afrikaner national identity also grew. And of course, wealth amongst the Afrikaners grew because they had that kind of support from that sector. Do you find that stepping into this particular role during the transition and post the transition, that there has been a mind shift change in the various individuals? Probably, okay, Santam is gone, but there must have been individuals who filtered through into the other banks. Did you have a challenge, dealing with that mindset, or were people beginning to realize that, something more needed to be done?
No, I think by and large, I think people are beginning to realize that. Are there pockets, whether it's in banks or other institutions, are there pockets of resistance to? There probably are, okay? But let me give you an example. So for the last 5 years or so at the Banking Association, my board meetings, 90% of the agenda is on the broader issues, 10% on banks. So the sorts of people, so the Sam Shabalalas of this world, the Mike Browns of this world, the Stephen Kosseffs of this world, the Maria Ramoses of this world, when she was heading up EPSA and so on, those are the people who sit on the Banking Association board, okay? When I was MD there, for the last 5 years, discussions were obviously on the corruption and the Gupta issues and so on, and how we stand up against that, and banks did. How do we conduct our business so that we become more relevant? How do we conduct our business so that we are in business in 20 years' time? Those were the sorts of discussions that we have, okay? I had a board executive committee that I used to talk to about banking operations and so on. But at the board level, those are sorts of discussions. So I think that there is a realization that we need to do things differently. And so I think that to me, the role I've played in business, I still see that as an activist role, okay? And that's why I've enjoyed the Banking Association. So I used to clash often with banks on the long-term sustainability issues and the short-term bottom line issues, okay? And those clashes were good because it gave it a good dynamic, and it gave me the opportunity to talk to them. Sure, you're doing this now, you're making these profits now. If we don't do the following in this area, are you still going to be making those profits in 10 years' time? But if we do the following, not only would you be making profits, you're probably making more money. Because inclusion and working with communities, it's not what you're doing, is you're making an investment in developing additional markets for yourself.
Yeah, it's a bigger market.
Yeah. And that's a language I used to talk to them, not because it's a good thing to do. Of course it's a good thing to do. But you're creating markets for yourself. So don't see this as an expense, see this as an investment. Okay, so, I mean, when I started there 10, 15 years ago, probably about 15 to 20% of bankable people had a bank account. Right? Today, if you look at Finmark Trust statistics, about 78, 79% of bankable people have a bank account. For a developing country, we're probably amongst the top. Okay? 21% still don't have a bank account. We've got to work on that. Right? But there's been significant progress. So let me also talk, so I don't know if you know of this organization called Finmark Trust. It's become the preeminent sort of research and policy body for the financial sector, in the financial sector, and does a lot of work on inclusion and so on. Now, quite a few years ago when I was at the Banking Association, before I became MD actually, the guy who used to head up DFID in this country approached me. And he said, Kes, look, we do a lot of small projects. I want to do a project in the financial sector that brings about scale in inclusion. But I need a private sector partner to do this. Are you guys prepared to partner? I thought it's a good idea. I told my then CEO, we went to the board, and at that time the board said, no, this has got nothing to do with us. So Hugh Scott was his name. So Hugh then said, what do we do? I said, no, Hugh, give me time. 3 years later, I took that thing back to the board, and the board said, okay, let's establish this thing. And we established Fernmark Trust as part of the Banking Association. And its role was to look at how banks become more inclusive. Okay? I remember interviewing the first CEO, a guy by the name of David Porteous. And David's first question was, Cass, what are my barriers here? What are the parameters? I said, David, this is greenfield stuff. I'm talking to you because I know you can push this. Go ahead and do what you need to do. Okay. We then took the decision that if this thing is going to be a legitimate, credible body that pushes for financial inclusion, it can't be part of the Banking Association. We then hived it off as a Section 21. Today, I'm the only, well, I'm not even in the banking industry now, but I chair that thing at the moment. I'm the only banker there. So people like Ishmael Kabela and a few others are on the board of trustees, and they do their own thing. They work with the National Treasury. They come out with something called FinScope every year, which tracks inclusion. FinScope, we've been approached now by Pakistan and Thailand and Indonesia and other African countries and so on. We do FinScopes all over there. And Fernmark has become an amazing body that does research and stuff related to the financial sector and inclusion, but not as part of the financial sector anymore. So it's those sorts of things. So you start, you get pushback, you don't give up, you restructure, you push, and you get things done. And that's the way to do it.
Okay, so I'm going to take you a bit back, and then I'm going to bring you into the present, but we're going to talk about business and COVID. But just to go a little bit back, before we started the program, you mentioned something about some Indian businessmen who were involved also in an indirect way in the transition, because ultimately the transition involved the much larger corporations, like you said, the Anglos and the Rothschilds, etc. But tell us a little bit about this background. It's something obviously that many of us don't know.
About the Indian involvement. So look, Indian businesses and the Indian business community traditionally had been very supportive of the democratic movement, the mass democratic movement, as we used to call it. So even under the Transvaal Indian Congress, the United Democratic Front, we had lots of contact with Indian businesses across the country, in Natal through the Natal Indian Congress and the UDF, here to the Transvaal Indian Congress and the UDF. And Indian businesses used to support us with funds, used to at times provide refuge for people who needed refuge, and were very, very supportive. I think through the transition, something called the Congress for Business and Economics was formed, which was an organization of Indian business people. And through the Congress for Business and Economics, Indian business people were kept informed of the transition, and where they could participate, they participated. But essentially, the negotiation and the transition was between the political parties on the one hand and big business on the other hand, right? And labor was involved and so on. But I think Indian businesses have traditionally been progressive. They participated in supporting the movement in different ways. And through the transition, I think the Congress for Business and Economics tried to involve to the extent that was possible, but kept Indian businesses within the fold and continuously informed of what was happening. And I think it's a good organization to speak to about that.
So we'll definitely look into that. And now I'm going to bring you right into the present with two questions. The first, your opinion about the court ruling where they have said that the Reserve Bank must make known all the apartheid documents, etc. So the court has asked for the Reserve Bank to publish that or to to allow for transparency and openness with regards to that. And the second one is, how do you see the role of business in South Africa current now with the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis that has basically erupted in our economy?
Okay, so on the first one, I mean, if the court rules that Reserve Bank must make those documents available, I think the Reserve Bank must make the documents available. What people who have applied to court to do that want to do with those documents is a different story, okay? Look, I'm not too supportive, to be quite honest, of using that sort of information. So now if you want a whole lot of reparations and all of those sorts of stuff, I think we have bigger problems in our country right now, okay? If I wanted to put pressure on business and so on, I would put pressure on businesses to actually help us start rebuilding now than going back to 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now those are ideological issues, I guess, and so on. And I'm not going to criticize or stand in judgment of people who might think differently. On the COVID thing, so when COVID hit, as Business Unity South Africa, because I joined Business Unity South Africa as CEO on the 1st of April. For the 6 months prior to that, I was acting CEO, actually, together with my banking association job, because I serve on the board of Business Unity South Africa. In July or so last year, we parted ways with the CEO. And the board that said, Kes, can't you play this role for a while? I said, you guys got to be kidding. But I said, look, speak to my board. They then spoke to my chair, and my chair said, Kes, look, I think it's important that somebody does this thing. If you can manage, be happy. So be happy if you want to do it, but up to you. It's a voluntary thing. You've got to make sure nothing falls through the cracks here. This is our priority, banking. And I said, okay, let's do it. So I was acting there.
Okay, thanks very much for that explanation. But just hold on to your thoughts, and I want to come back with a further discussion of that after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me in the ITV Networks with our very special guest, and that is Coovadia, who is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa.
So when COVID hit, BUSA contacted its members. We said, okay, what do we do here? We need to look at the economic impact, how it's impacting on our members. We need to see what government is responding. Can we work with the government in certain areas and so on? We then started getting calls from businesses as well as non-BUSA members. And what became quite clear is that we needed to put together a platform through which we involved all of business, not just BUSA members. And so we put together something called Business for South Africa, which is not a legal entity, it's not an organization, it's a platform. We then said that this thing needs to, on the health side, needs to work very closely with government to see how we can help. On the economy side, to keep in touch with businesses to see what the impact is and how we can minimize the damage. And then to look at how do we rebuild this economy post-COVID, okay? We then approached, I think, 4 management consultancy firms. We approached 3 communication agencies. We approached a bunch of lawyers. And we said, we're going to need support. We need to set up a project management office. We need to do a whole lot of work. We need professionals to do a lot of the work. We're going to need a lot of support. Can you guys help us? But on a pro bono basis. And we've got about 250 people working on this on a pro bono basis at the moment. So on the health side, and part of this, we worked with government to establish the Solidarity Fund, which is now its own legal entity. On the health side, Solidarity Fund put up 900 million rand to buy PPE. We competed globally for that PPE. We got it in. We through the Department of Health, distributed it and so on. We continue to work with the Department of Health on tracking and tracing stuff and putting into place methodologies to do that and so on. During the lockdown, we interacted closely between businesses and government, so if the regulation was there, police came and they didn't understand the regulation and wanted to do certain things, the business would call, we would interact with government, regulations would change as we learned those lessons. We kept on interacting with government to be more fact and evidence-based on the way they regulate, on the way they open up. The recent court judgment on things being a bit irrational, we told them about that a while ago. So not being able to buy open-ended shoes or whatever the case, just stupid. Okay, so we've been doing a lot of that, and now we're doing a lot of work on how do we resuscitate the economy, and it's not going to be business as usual. So we've done a lot of work in critical sectors. There's a 600-page document that goes into each sector, and the reality is that some sectors might have the opportunity to ramp up sooner than others. So if you take tourism and hospitality, it's not going to ramp up for another 2 years, at least. Now that's our job creator, right? That's our competitive advantage. So what does that mean for us? Okay, where are our trading partners? How are they opening up? Is what we used to export to them still relevant to them as they're rebuilding the economy? Those sorts of questions. So we've put in a lot of data, a lot of analysis, and we've got a document. We're now working on a document that pulls all of that together and says, okay, what does this mean? So what have been the lessons of COVID? One lesson is that it's made more stark, not that it needed to be made more stark, but it has made more stark the inequalities in our society. We have to rebuild the economy in a way that actually deals with those inequalities. That economy has got to be inclusive. If we don't do that, then we're going to have social unrest, right? So my discussion with business is that if we don't do that, there's going to be continuous social unrest, going to impact on your business, right? We've got to do this in a way where whatever your ideology, I don't care, quite honestly, but there are two basic stuff. We are bankrupt as a country, okay? We don't have the fiscal space, we don't have growth. We're going to have to get investment in, we're going to have to get growth going. Then we need to structure that growth so that it's inclusive and it's equitable, okay? We're going to have to go out into the market to raise money. That's when our downgrade is going to hit us. The money is going to be more scarce and more expensive. And we're going to be competing with other countries rebuilding their economies for the same money. All right, now all of this needs to be factored in. And so what we said, putting together a document, in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks at the most, we will start engaging government on this. We met the president. We told him we need a small team to engage. He's putting together a team. We're putting together a team. We will also engage bilaterally with labor. Through NEDLEC, we'll engage with the community constituency as well. But we're going to engage on the basis that some hard decisions need to be taken here. We don't have too many choices. Whether we like it or not, we're a little dot on the southern part of the world. Nobody cares about us anymore. They don't. So let's be pragmatic about this, and let's see how we rebuild this economy. So that's the sort of work we're doing now.
So it's, as you said earlier, we know more at a crossroads, we're at a T-junction?
Yeah.
And what does that mean for us?
That means we need to take the choice we need to make is that it's a choice of hard decisions. We need to, I think there needs to be a discussion between business and labor on what sort of relationship and compact we have, so that we don't run roughshod of labor laws and so on. We want to treat workers must be treated properly. But let's talk like we have a 50% unemployment rate, not a 6% unemployment rate. Okay, there are choices to be made, all right? There needs to be a discussion between business and government that says, government, it's not about you forming a new pharmaceutical company. and trying to run it like you ran SAA. Okay? It's about how do you enable investment in this country and enable business to create the jobs with proper regulation so that business does this properly. And then a discussion between business, government, and labor to say, okay, how do we do this together? Now, there's going to be compromises and trade-offs we all have to make. Business is going to have to make some compromises and trade-offs, as is labor, as is government. If we're not prepared to do that, and if we're not prepared to come together to have that discussion, then we're going to be a failed state.
So to avoid the failed state scenario, almost as a conclusion now, there also needs to be a recognition that you have to dust off some of the old and bring in the new.
Absolutely.
And part of that new, in terms of economic terms, is a shift in the economy from growth-centered economy to a well-being-centered economy. Do you think South Africans and people in your sector have started to visualize this concept? For example, what New Zealand has done, they introduced the first well-being budget into their economy. Is South Africa thinking in this term?
Yeah, look, I don't know where government is right now, but to me it's not a growth or a well-being budget. It's a budget that enables growth that will, and the growth needs to be managed in a way that people's all have a stake in
so
the outcomes of
well-being
growth,
is factored
right?
into that growth.
So well-being is factored into
but
that.
this means recognizing new values.
Absolutely. So let me finish with an example. So a good few months ago, I had lunch with Ricardo Hausmann, who's an economist at Harvard. And this was during the Zuma years, okay. So I asked Ricardo, you understand our situation here and so on. So what should the role of business be? I mean, at that time, business was quite active against Guptas and so on. And Ricardo told me, Kes, first you must continue doing what you're doing. Create jobs, pay taxes, blah, blah, blah. But let me give you an example. So he said, I'm originally from Venezuela. Okay. He said the second biggest conglomerate in Venezuela, the state was threatening to take it over. And when the state had indicated that there was community mobilization to stop the state from doing this, from taking over the second biggest corporation in the country. And he says, why? Because that corporation did its business in a way that developed the community in which it was doing its business. He says, that's what you've got to do.
So it was business-community partnership.
Yeah, so that's what it's all about, right? And that's what sustainability is all about. So it's that mindset that we need to have, all right? Now, Ricardo Hausmann is not some lefty economist. He's been advising people like Trevor and them for years. So he's a sort of centrist economist at Harvard. He said, that's what you've got to do. And this is what we're trying to tell government. It's a total recalibration of our socio-economy. That's what it is. So one of the documents we've got, there's a graphic there that shows Vietnam, China, and South Africa over 20 years. Vietnam and China recognize certain things and they shifted their economy fundamentally. South Africa, our economy still looks like it was 20 years ago, okay? And we can't carry on like that. And COVID has just made those discussions more urgent.
Okay, so to conclude, this is a question for me now. As a citizen of South Africa paying taxes, why is South African bank charges one of the highest in the world?
Yeah, and that, so there are good reasons and bad reasons. The good reason, what I find to be palatable reasons. So some of the bank charges we have are peculiar to South Africa. So we have, for instance, something called cash deposit fees, right? Now, why do we have that? We have, the banking industry has a separate organization called SABRIC, South African Bank Risk Institute, or something like that, which I used to chair as MD of BASA. We established that organization to fight bank-related crime. Do you know how much we spent on protecting cash in this country? 1.5 billion rand a year. That's got to be recovered from somewhere. Now, if we took care of security, cash deposit fees would disappear. Okay? Data in this country is extremely expensive. If we had more spectrum and we took care of that, data costs would disappear in banks. Having said that, there were things like penalty fees and so on, and that banks have reduced substantially. So what used to happen, it used to cost them, I don't know, 75 rand to establish a debit order for you. And when the debit order comes back because you don't have funds in your account, they used to slap you with 150 rand, right? Totally unacceptable. Those penalty fees with most banks have gone down to 5 rand. So I think what happened, there's some that is just not justifiable, and they need to be far more transparent about it. Okay? There's some that there's good reason for, and I think that through a mix between competition legislation and competition itself, I think this will be addressed. So if you look at, Reserve Bank has issued 3 bank licenses in the last 2 years. Bank Zero, which is in the process of getting it, Discovery, and Time Bank. All electronic banks of an electronic platform. And that's going to be the future of banking. And that's going to just drive costs out of the window. So any bank, the big banks, if they don't actually start addressing their legacy issues in a way that provides banking services to you guys, young people, who want it now, who want it off any platform that's convenient to them, who want it cheap, who want it transparently, that bank is going to go out of business. Okay, so I think that there's legacy issues here. Banks in this country grew phenomenally large, and they were protected by government, and they serviced a small part of the economy so they could check their charges up and so on. All of that has changed, and I think all of this will change. So I think that, and banks realize that in the next few years, their whole fee structure and business model is going to have to change.
Thank you. And from that, I get that the future of this country is the aspiration of the youth, right?
No, young people, absolutely. As an old person, I wish more youth would become involved in all of this. As I told you earlier, I want to retire. I don't want to be involved in all of this.
I think they will. But thank you very much for all of these insights, Cass.
Cheers.
It was really wonderful chatting with you.
Good chatting to you guys. Thank you. And thanks for coming out. And stay safe and stay healthy. Yeah?
So thank you for those wonderful insights. And with that, we're right at the end of Finding Me. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.